Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Dami Adewale.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be finding out how the Canal and River Trust is co-designing a new communications campaign with its target audience and hearing about some surprising discoveries made along the way. But first, Dami, you were at the High Court last week for the Kids Company judicial review hearing. What happened?
Yes, so the case covered a complaint that was initially brought by Camilla Batmanghelidj, the former chief executive of Kids Company, who had a request for a judicial review challenging the Charity Commission's report into the charity. Unfortunately, Batmanghelidj died last January, and Michael Karim-Kerman, who was the clinical director at the charity, was permitted to pursue the review in her place.
So this is a case that doesn't seem to be going away. Just as a reminder, this charity Kids Company closed 10 years ago in August, and there have been legal wranglings for coming up to 5 years. The judicial review relates to the inquiry which was published by the Charity Commission in 2022, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. The regulator's report was published in 2022 and found Kids Company operated a high-risk business model and said the charity had destroyed and hadn't made records in some cases regarding its beneficiaries.
And what is the complaint that Michael Karim-Kerman has against this?
So Kerman's lawyers told the High Court that the report contained critical evidential gaps by not engaging in detailed analysis of the records to find out whether any material data was lost. The claimant also said that the regulator relied on the evidence of a single witness regarding its claim that some records were destroyed, and this evidence was questioned at a previous High Court hearing.
So that was day one of the hearing. What happened on day two?
The Charity Commission defended itself by accusing Kerman of seeking to inappropriately immunise Kids Company and its trustees against scrutiny. The regulator said its report clearly set out that there was no dishonesty, bad faith or inappropriate personal gain in the operation of the charity, and when there wasn't enough evidence to support its observations, none were made.
So that was 2 days of hearing at the High Court. What's going to happen next?
From what I understand, the judge is going to review the case and deliver a reserved judgment. And I've been told it could take months before a decision can be made and published. I've been told it could take between 3 and 6 months. So we'll have to wait and see what happens next.
It's going to be very interesting to see what the outcome of this hearing is going to be, what the judge decides. And yes, interesting to see how it might potentially influence legal proceedings and indeed inquiries by the Charity Commission into charities going forward. Moving on to our main discussion, we're building on last week's episode in which we found out how the charity Sister System has remained faithful to a process of co-creation in the way it designs and delivers its activities alongside the care levers it exists to support. Today, we'll be talking about how charity campaigns can be designed in partnership with the people they're intended for.
We have 2 guests with us in the studio for this discussion. First up is Claire Gauci, Public Safety Campaigns Manager at the Canal and River Trust. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
Also with us is Emily Rayner, Senior Consultant at the Behaviour Change and Communications Agency Claremont. Claremont has worked with the Canal and River Trust on a recent water safety campaign, which the charity co-designed with the young people it was aimed at, and we'll hear about that in just a minute. But first, to get us started, Emily, could you please tell us what is co-design in the context of charity campaigns?
Hi, thank you for having me. Co-design is a type of qualitative research, and it's a much deeper way of gathering insights. It's a collaboration between individuals who have actually got the lived experience of the challenge that we're trying to address. It's a much deeper way of understanding that audience, the challenges that they're facing, and working with them to design a solution, whether that's a campaign or an intervention. And often you find much more innovative solutions or different ways of reaching your solution by working with that audience. So it might be a different messenger or a different channel from what you expected.
So Claire, would you please briefly outline the aims of your recent water safety campaign and why you decided to go down the co-design route?
Very sadly, every summer we have teenagers and young people drown in our waterways. It could be that they're all with their friends, they're hanging out on a hot day, they're getting into the water to cool down. It could be the joy of finishing their exams. There's lots of different reasons why people are getting in the water. We needed to do something about this. So we needed to raise awareness to these teenagers and young people to find another way to cool down. The challenge with this particular campaign is that we don't want to scare these people away. They have a right to be by the water, as we all do. It's a blue-green space that benefits our mental well-being, our physical health. Why shouldn't they hang out there? We're just asking them to please be safe. We wanted to reach young people and teenagers with an important water safety message in a way that works for them. We have done water safety work with young people and teenagers before, but it didn't quite land with them. It landed with their parents and their teachers, and we haven't found a way to reach teens themselves directly as the audience. So the main aim of this campaign, before we got to the campaign, was to research how we do that. How do we reach teenagers where they are, talk to them in a way that works for them, talk to them how it works for them, and give them a message that lands well with them. The best thing of working with Claremont has been learning about co-design and the importance of it. If you don't mind, I'll give you an example from a previous iteration of the campaign before we worked with Claremont. I was given a bit of budget in April and I was told, hey, we could do a video for before the summer. It was a very short time frame and a short turnaround to get everything done. From coming up with the original idea and speaking to a video production company through to actually releasing it. We wanted to release this video the last week of summer term so that it was ready for the summer holidays. We made a video. We worked with young actors at a drama school in Liverpool. We filmed on location in Liverpool, and we worked with a video production company who were incredibly sensitive to what we were trying to get across. The film landed very well on social media with the mums of the teenagers and young people and with the female teachers, but it didn't land with the intended audience of the teenagers and the young people. So we really had to take a step back and say, right, what's happening? What are we not doing? What are we not seeing? And that's why we reached out to Claremont.
So Claremont and Emily, you are specialists in behavioural change and campaigns and co-designing. So could you please tell me what are some of the common principles around a successfully co-designed campaign?
So we use a model that we've designed in-house called CoLab. So maybe if I could just talk you through that framework, it really helps us to think and structure our co-design activities. So firstly, to clarify the audience. So we spend time doing audience segmentation and really understanding not just the demographics of who we want to speak to, but the behavioural and psychological characteristics. So we can really hone in on who is the focus for this campaign. That's really important. We also spend a lot of time onboarding and building relationships with the audience. So we work very closely with community partners, and this enables us to build trust and relationships and get to know the people we're working with. In the case of the Canal and River Trust work, we worked with Wigan Youth Zone, and they helped build the relationship with the young people there. And then listening is a really important principle. It sounds really obvious, but actually going in without preconceived ideas, leaving your assumptions at the door, and hearing people's stories and the things that really matter to them expressed in the way that they want to talk about it. That's a really important part of the process, and doing that in a safe environment where people feel able to share. And then adapting, thinking about different ways in which we might ask questions, different ways in which people can input. So that might be digitally, it might be that they do it between sessions. Some people are very reflective thinkers, so if they haven't got the right ideas in the moment when we're asking them, giving them opportunities to come to us between sessions to share as well is really important. And then finally to build. So each session that we go into, we'll do a sort of point of reflection of saying, this is what you told us last week or last session, this is what we've heard, but have we got this right? Is there anything else you want to add here or change? And so each session we're sort of building with our audience, making sure that we've actually really understood them properly and giving them the opportunity again to input further in that process.
So then applying those principles to your new campaign, you mentioned that last year you worked with a youth theatre to put together your video to try and inspire young people to behave more safely around water. Presumably, even though you were working with young people in that, you weren't following the same process in terms of consulting them to make sure that you got the message out of what it was that you were trying to convey in that video.
No, we didn't. And that's where we failed. And that is what I've learnt so strongly from working with Claremont, is that co-design is fantastic. You need to work with your audience. If you want to reach the audience in the right way, you need to talk to them first. You're not going to ruin the surprise by talking to them first. It just means that you're talking to them in the way that works for them.
Then taking those principles that Emily has just outlined in terms of a successfully co-designed campaign, how did you put them to use in this new campaign?
Well, I was very lucky in the fact that I had Emily and her colleagues leading me through this, because I was a newbie to working in this way. So I very much took their lead. But what I really admired and really value about the work that they've done is the fact that young people were at the centre of this work. They were completely key. They are the audience, but we're learning from them. That was incredibly important. So we were lucky at the Canal and River Trust, we have 2,000 miles of waterway across England and Wales. These waterways flow through communities, and one of them is Wigan. And we have unfortunately had young people die over recent years in summer months. And we felt that after speaking with the teams in that area, that we could approach Wigan Youth Zone, which we already had a working relationship with, to see whether they might be able to find us some young people that we could borrow and talk to and learn from. So Emily and colleagues went up to Wigan Youth Zone, having spoken with the youth coordinators to make sure everything was okay. And they actually spoke to the young people. They said, what are the issues? Is it really annoying? Talk to us in the way that you want to talk to us. They asked some questions, but let the young people reply in the way that they wanted, gave the information in the way that they wanted to give it. I think there were some pizzas involved as well, which got, conversation going.
Always helpful.
Yeah. But it was just a really good way of creating a comfortable environment for them to speak. They weren't being judged. They weren't being told off. We were just trying to get information from them so that we could reach them in a way which worked for them. That was the first start. That was the start of it, trying to find out information. But then as Emily and her team continued to grow and develop and work out some artistic concepts, they went back to Wigan Youth Zone. They were able to continue that relationship and say, what do you think of these? Does it work? Does it not? Does it look a bit ridiculous? They weren't the words used. They replied in ways that were more suitable to them. They gave some really valuable feedback on what images they'd see on social media, what images they see on posters that would be around their town, what would make them stop and listen. And if we don't know that, then how are we going to design something that's going to get their attention?
Could you just tell me about your realization that social media was not the best form of engagement and how you went forward with that realization?
In the research that Emily and her team did through working with Wigan Youth Zone, the teenagers that they spoke to came back, I think overwhelmingly, and said they don't want to see anything on social media. They'd just scroll past it. They're not interested. They'd rather follow the trends that they wanted to follow, look at the content they want to see. They're not going to listen to something about being safe by water. They'd rather just find what they want. What they asked for was for Canal and River Trust and other organisations to actually go into their school, go to where they are and talk to them and give them, almost create a lesson about water safety. I was really, really surprised by that information. But that was incredibly helpful because then it made us refocus how we wanted to spend our money and how we wanted to spend our budget. There's no point working on lots of social media assets if that's not actually going to reach the audience that we're intending. If we wanted to reach their parents, then hey, maybe we would do that, and maybe that's a strand of the campaign for the future because they're still a valuable route through to our key audience. But actually what we've done now with the insights that Emily and her team have got is we've been working with the PSHE Association on a lesson plan that can be sent out to teachers across England and Wales to say, well, this is how you can start talking to young people about water safety. We will then look into how we develop that plan. It may have a video in it. It may have more artistic concepts that they can look at. But I was very, very interested about social media. So we may very well go down the route if we're trying to speak to their parents or teachers in the future, but probably for reaching teenagers, we'll go directly to them in their schools.
That's fascinating. As somebody who is definitely not a teenager and really just has an outsider's perspective of seeing young people on their phones all the time, you would think that that would be the way of reaching them if they're staring at their screens. But I guess probably your own social media following is more likely to be among the parents. Emily, from a behavioural change perspective, is that why social media isn't always the answer, or are there other considerations that charities should make about whether or not they're putting their messages out there on social media?
I think there are a number of factors that play into that question of whether social media is the appropriate channel or not. So it might be that it's a particular messenger, for example. So in the case of what Claire was describing, Canal and River Trust didn't feel like the appropriate messenger. And so we might think about, are there particular influencers? You're sort of tapping in. Again, this is why co-design is so important, asking the young people who they follow, who they'd like to hear from. So there are ways, I think, where you can create cut through as long as you find the right person to deliver that message or the right organisation. So I wouldn't rule it out with young people, but I think what we have to realise as well is there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of information that's being shared through social media. Young people are, like all of us, scrolling quite quickly sometimes through content. And if they're not going to dwell on a video, then its purpose has not been fulfilled. So again, it might not be not doing it, but thinking about, the length of time that you spend creating something, short and snappy. And then it might be about the particular platform, thinking about, where young people are actually viewing it, whether it's TikTok or somewhere else. So there's lots of considerations, and we certainly wouldn't rule social media out. But it certainly was interesting in this context that young people really wanted to have the opportunity to discuss and look at scenarios together and think about what the potential solutions might be when you're thinking about safety by water. They didn't want to just be passive. They wanted to be empowered to do something as a group. They also said to us, don't do it in assembly. That's too big. It's not discursive. There's no opportunity there. And they had people come in and talk about water safety, very well-meaning people. And that hadn't landed very well. So they wanted the opportunity to do that in the classroom setting amongst a small group of peers where they had the time to discuss and debate. I think that's a really important part of this, is to actually have a bit of back and forth and challenge one another, perhaps, in that scenario. The campaign, Have You Got Their Back, is very much about being led by and supported by your peers. And that's really, I think, what has been part of the solution as well, is thinking about how they discuss together what's safe, what the limits are, and how to keep each other essentially, out of danger by water.
When you say water safety and social media, the thing that immediately pops into my mind is the RNLI campaigns and their starfish position, I think it is. And it's very visual. It's performed really, really well for them on social media, on TikTok and elsewhere, I believe. But I guess it's that differentiation between what they're trying to achieve and what you are specifically with that teenage demographic, and the notion of, have you got their back? It needs to be more discursive. There needs to be potential for them to talk about the issues at play and kind of reach decisions themselves. So would you agree that that's why social media is not the way forward for you in terms of this specific campaign and the message that you're trying to get across and the teaching that you're trying to get through to these young people, as opposed to the RNLI, where it's much more of a kind of practical, this is what you do if you're stuck in the water?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The RLNI campaign is absolutely brilliant. I would really recommend anyone listening to go and have a look at their stuff. Anyway, it's an excellent charity. But yes, all the feedback that we got through the research and the insights and talking to the teenagers, that they wanted to talk about it. And part of the PSHE pack that is going to teachers from April is all about discussion and checking in with your friends, but learning when to step in. So perhaps it's at the point of deciding what they're going to do that day. Perhaps their friends then say, oh, well, let's try something else. Or is it at the point where they get to the lock and they want to do something, to people say something then? It's trying to educate them that it's okay to question. There's a lot of peer pressure. I am not a teenager, and it's been a long time since I've been one. And I grew up in a world where there wasn't social media. I didn't even get a phone till I was 18. So, it's a very different world, and I don't have really any right to say what my experience was like, because it is just such a different world now. But everyone seems to want to fit in much more than when I was younger. It was all about being part of the gang, really. And if you can try and basically give these young people the permission to question things that their friends have suggested, not to go against, not to break up friendships, but just to question it, to keep them safe and to find another way to have a good time.
I just wanted to talk about the budget considerations with this new approach. Could you just tell me more about that, what you had to consider and how you move forward?
It's a great question about budget because we simply didn't have any. The only reason this campaign has existed is because Canal and River Trust is a very grateful recipient of funding from the People's Postcode Lottery and the players of that lottery. We get a certain amount of money, and me and my team and I were able to pitch to the holders of that funding and say we'd like to do this work, and we were granted access to that money. So that's the only reason. So huge thank you to the players of People's Postcode Lottery for allowing us to do this really, really vital work. And then we spoke with Claremont about what we wanted to achieve, and we found an agreeable amount and we cracked on.
Presumably this process of commissioning Claremont, going to Wigan, holding these discussions, you mentioned pizza, so presumably no other forms of payment for the young people, but nevertheless having a consultancy taking on this work and then coming up with recommendations for you as a charity would probably be more expensive than just making a video. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. But the video that we made last time didn't work. So we knew we had to do something different. Because if we want to make a change, if we carry on doing what we've always been doing, we're not going to get very far. So we really had to take a look at ourselves. Well, I had to take a look at myself and the direction that I was going in and thinking, right, well, I have a limited budget, year on year. We have our social media audience, we have our social media teams, we've got our website. Is this actually sitting with the right people? How can we break out of this echo chamber of the people who we already know and who perhaps potentially already know our message? We do need to find a way to break out of this and reach them where they're at. So it was worth it. It was worth the money. Absolutely. 100% I'd do it again in a heartbeat because we needed to get the research behind it. The Canal and River Trust covers a huge amount of work, from construction projects to heritage projects. We've got volunteering, we've got ecology. There's a lot of demands on a lot of different people and a lot of different teams. And water safety is one of many, not to diminish it, but there's lots of different things going on at Canal and River Trust. So we were delighted that we were actually able to go external to people who could help us shape our thinking. I think that was one of the main things. At the time, there was lots of different issues across the Canal and River Trust, depending on which region you're in. It could be in the northeast or the northwest. It was more young people jumping into reservoirs. It could have been in the East Midlands. It's jumping into locks. There's lots of different areas and lots of different issues for lots of different reasons, for different people with different demographics. And we didn't know where to start. And we needed Claremont to come in and help us look at everything from above, to see the trends, to see what was going on, and to help us shape the direction where we wanted to go. And that was worth every single penny.
And wonderful that you were able to get the funding from the People's Postcode Lottery to be able to do it. There are lots of very small charities who unfortunately are struggling with funding at the moment and who might not have that opportunity. So I wondered, Emily, would you be able to provide any recommendations for smaller charities with smaller budgets that would really like to engage in a process of co-design when thinking about their communications, but perhaps don't have the money to be able to bring on a super big consultancy?
There are definitely ways in which you can do co-design on a low budget, particularly working with community partners. I think that's the right thing to do anyway, but it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So you don't need to go through a recruitment agency. You can work directly with organisations that are very close to the audience that you're trying to reach. So that could be your local mosque, it could be a youth centre, any type of community organisation. So I think spending time understanding where your audience go, where they're already at, meeting them in a place that feels familiar and safe, and working through those trusted intermediaries who already have that trust and that relationship with the audience you're trying to reach. That will get you a long way. And there was that mention of pizza, and we always ask our community partners what is an appropriate payment. So we've done other work with young people with a different youth organisation who asked us to pay London living wage, and that's what we did. But actually that isn't always appropriate. And we will always ask that question. And yeah, in the case of this one, it was pizza. And actually we went on Halloween as well and bought lots of sweets. So it really depends. It doesn't have to be very expensive to do that. And then I think it's about spending as much time as possible, once you've got to know them and you've built that relationship, really understanding the problem with your audience. Sometimes we get to do 6 weeks of co-design or more, but that's not the norm. Normally we get sort of 2 or 3 opportunities to meet with our audience, and that was the case in Wigan. And so just being kind of really thoughtful about how you conduct those sessions, what you want to get out of them, the things you really want to ask the young people. So there's a lot of planning involved and thinking about what your discussion is going to look like. It doesn't always go to plan. One of the sessions that we did with Wigan Youth Zone was quite chaotic. Young people were just very energetic during that session. And so I guess sort of the more you do it, the more you learn about how to handle those situations and how to work with your audience and get the most out of them. And that comes through time and practice. But yeah, having kind of lots of different types of activities, lots of different ways to engage, and then just thinking at the core of it, what is it I want to find out? What do I want to come away with? What's the information that's going to be really key to move this campaign forward? That will all really help.
And as somebody who has presumably held workshops aplenty in the past, I appreciate that it will be different depending on the type of group that you are engaging with. But do you have any kind of top tips for how, once you've got those people in the room and you've hopefully given them a slice of pizza, how you can get the most out of those sessions?
Yeah, particularly when we're working with young people, I think it's about doing activities that feel engaging and interactive. We did some interesting work with the Sweaty Betty Foundation where we went and walked around the neighbourhood and asked them about the places and spaces that they use and what was important to them in their environment. So thinking of different ways, you have to remember that in those situations, young people have just got out of school, they want to let off steam, they just want to talk to each other, talk about their day, giving them space to do that, but then also doing stuff that gets them up and about and moving, I found works really well.
And so, Claire, you've spoken about the success that you've had with the co-design approach, but is there anything that you do differently next time or anything that you'd recommend to any charities that are taking this approach?
Focus groups are key. I would do focus groups every other week if I could, just to continue learning, continue tapping into their thoughts, how they're feeling about things, and also just think about how many audiences you have as part of your campaign. We've talked a lot about the teenagers, obviously, and young people, but we have also talked about their mums and their female teachers in particular. Those two groups responded very well to the video that I'd made in a short period of time with a quick turnaround budget. And that was a really interesting learning point for me. So I don't see why we can't reach that audience in the future as part of this campaign with the content tweaked to make sure that it's relevant for them. One of the challenges at Canal and River Trust is that it's 2,000 miles of waterways across England and Wales. The trust is split up into sort of 6 functioning regions. It's, resource heavy. We've got people fixing lock gates. We've got people sorting out the canals, picking up litter. We've got volunteers helping. There's a lot of ask on our resources. And what I've learned from this campaign is that we can't rely just on social media or on the online world. In order for us to really go ahead and really get this message out, I would like to work with our community teams, but obviously they've got to draw on their resources as well. And there are lots of other things that they're being asked to do. I would love to see this campaign develop where we've got volunteers who can help us go out.
Thanks, Claire. And Emily, as a final question for you, for any charities that are embarking on their co-design journey, what would your top tips or recommendations be?
I think it's really important to try to avoid tokenism. Co-design, as I've mentioned, might not be as many sessions as you want. It might not be quite in the way that you want it, but I think it can still be really deep and insightful. And one of the things that really helps with that, I think, is sort of making sure you're coming back to that audience as many times as possible. We responded to a brief last week which asked us to show our commitment to keeping the audience informed, and I think that's really refreshing. If you can find ways to do that, take them on the journey with you, and at the end say, you made this, this is because of you, this is something that we created together. I think that's a really powerful thing to do and a really important part of the co-design process, and we don't always get that opportunity, but that's something I think other charities should definitely strive to do.
Well, Emily, Claire, it's been such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Emily and Claire, and we've included a link in the show notes to some resources on the Claremont website for anybody wanting some pointers on how they can proceed in co-designing a campaign but don't perhaps have the budget to enlist full consultancy services. That's it for this week. Emily and I will be joined next week by Louise Harris Chief Operating Officer at Crisis, to hear about how the charity is responding to the need to treat diversity and inclusion as a strategic issue and not just a people one. But for now, from Dami and me and everyone at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Till Owen.